Welcome back, everyone. You're joining us again for a deep dive. And this time, we're going to be looking at some pretty interesting stuff. We're going deep into a bunch of intelligence files that were kept secret for a long time.
Yeah, think about it like you're getting a sneak peek into this like secret history, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And we're not just going to skim these old reports. We're going to dig into those little details, the kind of stuff that makes you go, huh, what's that about? You know what I mean?
Right. What are those little details hinting at? What's the bigger picture here?
Exactly. And that's really our goal today. We're on a mission to find those unexpected connections and figure out what it all means.
To uncover the implications, right?
You got it. So to kick things off, let's jump into this document from November 1962.
All right, let's hear it.
It's all about this seminar that happened in Mexico City. It was put on by the Inter-American Federation of Working Newspapermen's Organizations, FIOPP for short.
VOP. Okay. Journalists getting together.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
But here's the thing, right there in the document, it says FIOP is a Kubark-influenced organization.
Now that's interesting. And just as a reminder for our listeners, QBARC, that's a CIA cryptonym, right?
Exactly.
So right off the bat, you're looking at potential U.S. government influence over a media organization. And it wasn't just, keeping tabs from a distance. The document goes on to say they were in contact with FIOP's guy in Panama and their co-chairman in Washington, both labeled as covert associates.
Covert associates, so not exactly a transparent relationship. And for you, the listener, this is where it gets really interesting. Think about it. What does this mean for the news you might have been reading back then? Could there have been a hidden hand shaping those stories, pushing certain viewpoints, especially on issues related to Latin America?
Right, and this raises a really important point, especially thinking about the Cold War. How much of the information you were getting was actually being influenced by different groups with their own agendas, especially governments working behind the scenes?
Exactly. It's a whole different way of looking at the media landscape back then.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's the FIOP seminar. Now, in the same document, there's another detail that caught my eye. It mentions this upcoming seminar in Miami, Florida. This one's being put on by the Colegio Nacional de Periodistas de Cuba.
Okay, so that's what's that, the Cuban National College of Journalists?
Yeah, exactly. But the key here is they were operating in exile. And there are three guys named as expected attendees: Guillermo Guerra Rodriguez, Salvador Diaz-Versenson, and Francisco Gomez Hector.
Okay, three names. Got it.
Now, think about this for a second. You have this FIOP seminar in Mexico City with its potential U.S. government ties, and then almost at the same time, you have exiled Cuban journalists gathering in Miami, not too far away geographically.
That's an interesting coincidence, especially given the political climate back then, 1962, right?
Yep, right after the Cuban Missile Crisis. So, for you, the listener, this raises some questions. Were these two events connected in some way? Were the people attending one also involved in the other? Could there have been a shared agenda? It's hard to say for sure, but it makes you think about the flow of information and the networks that existed within this media sphere.
And given the tensions surrounding Cuba at that time, you can bet the U.S. government was very interested in what these journalists were up to. Any connection between them would have raised red flags.
And the document confirms that. It ends with a request to request traces on above. So they wanted to gather more intel on these specific individuals.
Which makes sense from an intelligence perspective.
Yeah.
These weren't just journalists. They were potential players in a much bigger game. And that game involved Cuba, the U.S., and the whole Cold War struggle.
Absolutely. So for you, the listener, this document is like a window into this hidden world where governments and the media intersect, especially during times of international tension. It's really fascinating stuff.
It is, and it makes you think about how much we really know about the forces shaping the information we get.
Okay, let's shift gears for a bit and talk about a guy named Maurice Halperin. He pops up in a bunch of these documents.
Okay, Maurice Halperin. Tell me more.
Well, a memo from December 1962 mentions his current address. And guess where it was?
I don't know where.
Havana, Cuba.
So someone in Cuba, and his address is being tracked by U.S. intelligence. That's a pretty strong indicator that this guy was someone they were keeping tabs on.
Exactly. And there's this little comment from a source in the memo that really paints a picture for you. It says, Halperin always seems to show up wherever there is some sort of activity going on.
Some sort of activity.
Yeah.
That's vague but intriguing. Makes it sound like he was a central figure in something.
Yeah, almost like he was intentionally inserting himself into different situations, whether those are political movements, social circles, who knows? But he was definitely on their radar.
He was definitely someone worth watching, that's for sure.
Now let's fast forward a few years to August 1967.
Okay, 1967. What's happening then?
There's this memo about trying to figure out when a guy named Leo Chern is coming back to New York City.
Leo Chern. Okay, so why were they so interested in his travel plans?
Well, the memo says it's because and then there's a redaction, for whom Chern is providing cover, is back in the States on leave, and when he tries to contact Chern, found that he was out of town.
Providing cover. So right away, you're thinking some kind of clandestine operation, right? Someone's real activities are being hidden, and this Leo Chern is somehow involved. And we don't know exactly who "our" refers to because of the redaction, but it definitely implies an intelligence connection.
Exactly. So we've got this mystery man who Chern's covering for, and now they need to connect with each other.
Interesting.
Okay, and here's where things start to connect across different time periods. Let's go back to February 1952.
Okay, way back.
There's a memo detailing a cover story for Research Institute of America for a Mr. Akon.
Mr. Apon, right?
And the memo gives a little background on him. He's got a master's degree in international economic relations from the University of Chicago.
Okay, so an academic.
Yeah, and it says he just got back from Europe where he was doing economic research and writing for this weekly newsletter on, get this, socialism and Soviet satellite regimes.
Interesting area of focus, especially during those times.
Right. It makes you think about the kind of people who might have been recruited for covert ops during the Cold War. Someone with a seemingly legit academic background could easily fly under the radar.
Right. Their research could be a perfect cover.
Exactly. Now, here's the crucial part. The memo states that Akon's hiring may be delayed for some time, and then it says, Mr. Leo Chern, who will be his cover, may have calls to be used.
Hold on. So Leo Chern is back in the picture.
Yep, same guy. And here he is providing cover for someone involved in research related to, well, basically the Soviet Union and its allies.
So it's not just a one-off thing. This suggests Chern was playing a role in facilitating or managing these covert activities. And the fact that his name pops up in connection with cover stories across different years is pretty telling.
Right, like he was a go-to guy for making these operations look legitimate.
Almost like a, what do they call it, a handler?
Maybe? And it gets even more intriguing. Another memo from that same month, February 1952, mentions Bob wanting to see the Leo Chern file. And the reason? He gives him 5 years on LC as valuable analyst.
LC. Who's that?
Don't know, it's redacted. But the point is, Chern wasn't just providing cover, he was also seen as a source of valuable information or analysis. His activities were being documented and considered important over a long period.
So he was valuable in multiple ways, providing cover, offering insights, maybe even playing an active role in the intelligence gathering itself.
The plot thickens.
Indeed.
Then we jump to March 1954. There's a memo about a meeting set up for Leo Chern with a Mr. McCann to discuss Case 9145.
Another case. And again, Chern's at the center of it.
Yep. And another memo clarifies that McCann's supposed to meet Chern prior to the CAT, and then there's a redaction appointment. We don't know what CAT refers to, but it points to some kind of operational context where Chern was needed.
Right, like there's this whole hidden world of activity we're just getting glimpses of.
Exactly. Now, fast forward to January 1956. There's a memo that says, Ray Millard has requested that you try to set up appointment for him with Leo Chern in connection with this case, redaction, for sometime next week. And then there are a bunch of memos back and forth about scheduling and confirming those meetings between Millard and Chern. What does all of this tell you?
It's pretty clear, isn't it? Leo Chern was a key figure in all of this. He kept popping up in connection with different investigations, different cases, different people, spanning years. It's like he was a central node in this whole intelligence network.
And you know what really clinches it? There's a handwritten annotation on one of the memos that's really revealing. It says Chern knows he's writing for a magazine, but then it says escalated but is not witting, meaning he's involved at a higher level, but he doesn't know the full intelligence connection, and his work is going to be given to the editor without revealing where it really came from.
Wow, so they were using him. He was unknowingly contributing to their intelligence operations through his writing.
Exactly.
That's unsettling, to be honest.
Yeah.
It really highlights the lengths they were willing to go to and how they could manipulate people without them even realizing it.
So to sum it up, you've got this guy, Maurice Halperin, who's always showing up where the action is. And then you have Leo Chern, who emerges as this recurring figure. He's providing cover for people. He's offering valuable analysis. And he's even unknowingly contributing to intelligence operations. What was the full extent of his involvement? What made him so valuable to them? It's hard to say for sure, but these documents definitely give us some clues.
Yeah, and they highlight the hidden connections between these different intelligence initiatives and the unexpected roles people played in making them happen.
Okay, let's switch gears again. This time, we're looking at a document from May 1971.
Okay, 1971. What do we have here?
This one lists a bunch of Americans who went to the World Peace Council, or WPC, conference in Budapest.
The World Peace Council. That's interesting. What were they doing there?
Well, on the surface, it might not seem related to what we've been talking about, Cuban journalists, cover stories, all that, but it shows just how broad the scope of U.S. intelligence interest was during this period.
Right, they weren't just focused on one specific area. They were keeping tabs on all sorts of activities and organizations around the world.
Exactly. And the WPC was particularly interesting to them because, well, it was often seen as having ties to the Soviet Union, so any Americans attending would have raised eyebrows.
Sure, makes sense.
Now, here's a detail that really jumps out. The WPC awarded the Joliot-Curie Gold Medal to the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. posthumously.
Wow, so this organization that's potentially linked to the Soviet Union is honoring a key figure in the U.S. civil rights movement. That's a pretty powerful statement.
It is, and it makes you think about the WPC's influence and reach, even within the U.S.
Right. It also explains why the U.S. government would have been so interested in who was attending their conferences.
Absolutely. The document goes on to list the other attendees and their affiliations, too. You've got people from the Committee on European Peace and Security, the Committee on Indochina Aggression, and so on. It gives you a snapshot of the political leanings of some Americans involved in these international peace movements at the time.
So we're seeing connections again. The U.S. government is monitoring these individuals and groups involved in international affairs, regardless of what they're specifically focused on, whether it's journalism, academic research, or peace activism. It all fits into this broader pattern of intelligence gathering.
Exactly. It was all about understanding these networks and potential influences, wherever they might be.
Comprehensive approach.
Okay, ready for another case. This one involves the Leonker Press Service. A dispatch from December 1967 describes it as a leftist writer press service operating out of Mexico City.
Leonker. Okay, so what's the story here?
Well, the interesting part is the stated objective, to turn Leonker into a more effective and politically reliable operation.
Politically reliable. That sounds like they wanted to control the message.
Exactly. And their plan was to replace the current leadership with someone described as Identity One, a respected, independent, leftist Mexican journalist.
So they wanted to install their own guy, someone they could trust to steer the narrative in the right direction.
And here's what's important for you, the listener, to understand. Leonker had a paid staff of leftist writers who were producing articles that were being distributed to newspapers all over Latin America.
Wow, so they were pumping out content that was reaching a pretty wide audience.
Yep. And the U.S. government saw this as an opportunity to influence the media landscape in a very direct way.
Instead of just monitoring or trying to subtly influence existing media outlets, they were aiming to control the content at the source.
Right. It's different from the potential influence over FIOP we talked about earlier. This was about more direct control over the message.
And you know what? This approach wasn't without its challenges. The document mentions they had trouble managing these writers, and eventually they decided to just use Leonker as a temporary roof for single leftist writer agents.
So it sounds like their grand plan to control this whole press service didn't quite pan out the way they hoped.
Right, which is interesting in itself. It shows that even with all their resources and planning, these covert media manipulation efforts can be really tricky.
But the takeaway for you, the listener, is this. Whether it was through influencing existing organizations like FIOP or trying to control a press service like Leonker, the U.S. government was actively trying to shape public opinion in Latin America.
It was a strategic priority for them. They saw the media as a battleground in the Cold War.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on to a document that I think you'll find particularly significant. It's a secret message from April 1968.
Okay, 1968. This must be a big one.
It is. This message details information on someone called Elmer Go, who has positively identified accused assassin as James Earl Ray.
James Earl Ray, the man accused of killing Martin Luther King Jr.
Exactly. So this document puts us right in the middle of one of the most pivotal moments in American history. And the fact that intelligence agencies were involved in the positive identification of Ray just highlights the magnitude of the event and the intensity of the investigation.
Absolutely. It's chilling to think about, really.
The message goes on to give a physical description of Ray and the different aliases he used. It also mentions that he served in the U.S. Army, was discharged as inept and unable to adjust, and had a long criminal history: burglary, armed robbery, forgery. And importantly, it notes that he had been missing from Missouri State Penitentiary since April 1967.
So a troubled individual with a violent past, and he manages to escape prison and then, well, the rest is history, sadly.
Now, think back to what we talked about earlier, the World Peace Council honoring Martin Luther King Jr. just a few years after his assassination.
Right, the Joliet-Curie Gold Medal.
Yeah.
It's hard to reconcile those two things. On the one hand, you have the U.S. government tracking down his accused killer, and on the other, you have this international organization celebrating his legacy.
It's a stark contrast, and it speaks to the complexity and the contradictions of this period. You have the tragedy of King's death, the pursuit of justice, and then this global recognition of his impact on the fight for civil rights.
It's a lot to process, really.
Okay, one last document for you. This one's from August 1971 and details observations of Hosea Williams, the leader in the SCLC, during a visit to Ethiopia.
Hosea Williams.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, even his trip to Ethiopia was noteworthy to intelligence agencies. Remember, we're talking about a prominent figure in the civil rights movement.
Right. Any international contacts he made would be of interest to them.
Exactly. But here's what really stands out in this document. Williams is reported to have said that he knew Julian Bond had arranged the assassination of Martin Luther King.
Whoa, hold on. That's a serious allegation.
Yeah, and the memo does say, but he was not sure about this. But even so, that statement is huge.
It really is.
Yeah.
It shows that even years after King's assassination, there were still deep suspicions and unanswered questions within the movement itself. And the fact that this was being documented in intelligence reports just underscores the ongoing controversy surrounding his death.
Exactly. Now, think back to what we talked about earlier, the tracking of James Earl Ray as the accused assassin.
Right, the official suspect.
So now you have this complex web of information. On one hand, you have the authorities pursuing Ray. On the other hand, you have a prominent figure within the movement making serious allegations against someone else.
It muddies the waters, doesn't it?
It does, and it raises the question, was there more to the story than we know? Did the full truth about King's assassination ever really come to light? It's a question that still resonates today.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that history is rarely simple or straightforward. There are often layers of complexity and competing narratives that can persist for generations.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what should you, the listener, take away from all of this? We've seen how seemingly unrelated pieces of information, from seminars for journalists to covert press services, from the pursuit of an assassin to allegations within the civil rights movement, can reveal bigger trends and raise important questions about historical events and the role of intelligence operations.
And by digging into these primary sources, we can uncover these hidden connections and gain a deeper understanding of how information was managed and manipulated during this period.
And here's a final thought for you to ponder. What other unexpected connections might still be waiting to be discovered in those vast archives? What might those discoveries tell us about the interplay of information, influence, and the stories we tell ourselves about the past?
It's a fascinating thought.
It is, and we encourage you to keep exploring these topics, keep asking questions, and keep digging for those hidden truths. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.